prerequisite is likability. In a recent Harvard Business Review article, defined likability, and it had much to do with performance. It had a lot to do with the ability to admit when you're wrong, when you've made a mistake, and you have a growth mindset. You learn from that, and you fail forward and bring the team with you. And it also has to do with that executive presence, which is around character, style, and substance. And if we can find our way through that matrix, because it's kind of a lattice of requirements that I just named, we can move our likability up on the scale for our team members, and our team members will be inspired to follow. But we have to set a clear vision.
You're listening to the Black to Business Podcast, an educational podcast providing Black entrepreneurs with the tools and resources to start and grow their businesses. We chat with vetted Black entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business owners as they provide tips and resources to help take your business to the next level. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall. Welcome back to another episode of the Black to Business Podcast. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall, and today we're diving deep into a topic that is the very essence of entrepreneurship, building an authentic and influential CEO voice. We know that as entrepreneurs, you are the architects of your own success, and your voice isn't just your words, it's your vision, your values, and your ability to inspire and lead. In this episode, we're joined by an exceptional guest, L. Michelle Smith, whose expertise in leadership development, grounded in evidence-based coaching, positive psychology, and neuroscience, will shed light on how to cultivate the CEO presence that can truly transform your entrepreneurial journey. It's not just about what you say, it's about how you say it, and more importantly, who you are while you're saying it. She's going to uncover the secrets of evidence-based authenticity, self-discovery, and likable leadership. You'll gain insights in how authenticity can fuel trust, collaboration, and innovation in your business. Discover the powerful tool of self-awareness and how understanding your values can lead to better decision-making. Plus, we'll delve into the intricate aspects of likability and leadership within the entrepreneurial landscape. But that's not all. Elle Michelle will also guide us through the art of impactful CEO communication, offering strategies to conquer common challenges like imposter syndrome and self-doubt. We'll explore the importance of mindset shifts, including the dynamics of fixed versus growth mindsets and how they can shape your entrepreneurial journey. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that this is a banging episode. So without further ado, let's dive in. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So on the Black to Business Podcast, we always start by having our audience get familiar with our guests. So if you could just share a little bit about who you are, what's it that you do in your business, and kind of how you got where you are today.
Sure. I am L. Michelle Smith. I am a 3-time best-selling author. Ooh. I am a certified executive and personal coach. I got my credentials from the International Coaching Federation and the CAP Institute, which is Coaching and Applied Positive Psychology. I work in evidence-based coaching. So it's science-based, it's based in positive psychology and neuroscience. And as well, I am a speaker. I have over 25 years in corporate America, mostly as a senior leader. About 15 of those years, I was in an officer capacity. I also ran my own business for about a decade. I had my own integrated marketing and public relations firm. And of course, now I'm running my business. So I've run a couple businesses. And about half of my career, about 12 of those years, I was VP and up. So I made VP before the age of 30, and I made senior vice president before the age of 40. I am a mom in chief. I have a little girl who just turned 11 years old. And what else can I tell you?
That's good. That's a great start. And I am so excited to have you on the show truly because like you mentioned, your years of experience. And also on the Black to Business podcast, just I know so many entrepreneurs can gain so much value from what we're going to talk about today, which is about elevating your CEO voice and how we can begin to cultivate that authenticity and influence.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to go ahead and dive right in and first talking about unveiling authentic CEO leadership. So, Michelle, for you, what does it mean for a CEO to have an authentic leadership voice?
Well, that authentic leadership voice, let's start with the word authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
We hear it used a lot, but the reality is that you cannot be authentic unless you know who you are. And so many of us don't have that self-awareness. We can give you our names, we can give you our titles, we can tell you where we're from, we can tell you about our people, but we don't have that deep, intimate knowledge of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do the hard work to find out who you are, then and only then can you be authentic. So it's one thing to be a leader, but it's also another thing to be that authentic person, and merging those two people, if you will. There's all one person, but that person becoming the leader has a real sense of understanding who they are and how they come across in a space and what the
Right.
people who are in that space need. An authentic leader is one that is okay with sharing much of themselves. We're not talking about giving away the farm,
Mm-hmm.
but we are talking about humanizing your persona with the people who you're trying to lead. So it's very important to understand who you are. Now, in order to be authentic, I often say that your passport to authenticity is excellence, whether that is in your own business or in corporate America. You have to be excellent and killing it at every turn in order to show up and be your full self. And it's not always possible to be your full self in some spaces, but instead of code switching, we like to style flex. And that means that you turn up the volume on who you are fully if you're in a room where people are comfortable with your excellence and you have proven out that you are excellent and they're ready for it. Some spaces are not ready for all of your excellence or your authenticity, and in which cases you dial it down, but you never, ever cover.
That is so good. Style flex. I love that. So, also, could you kind of like provide some insights from your own journey in advising those in the C-suite and your expertise in strategic communication from some of the top brands? Like, what have you noticed, and what are some of the things that you see that make those leaders stand out?
Well, over the course of my career, I have had the fortune of working with all sorts of leaders. But the ones that stand out
Mm-hmm.
have that it factor. And you hear people say, what is the it factor? They use that term
Mm-hmm.
loosely. But for me, it means that they actually are authentic. They feel accessible, even if they aren't accessible. They're relatable.
Right.
They use storytelling to relate to other people. I'll give you a great example. When we think about Oprah or we think about Michelle Obama,
Mm-hmm.
we know Michelle Obama was the first lady of the United States and she's one of the most beloved. But what made her most beloved was her relatability. It wasn't that she was the first lady of the United States of America. We've had a lot of those. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't really endear ourselves to everybody the same way. But because Michelle was able to tell stories about being that little black girl from the south side of Chicago, suddenly we could relate to Michelle. The same with Oprah.
Mm-hmm.
We don't relate to Oprah because she's some big media mogul and she's interviewed all of these wonderful people. We relate to Oprah because she was that little girl, the little black girl who grew up in the South who was abused. She tells a story that many people can relate to. They can't relate to being a media mogul. So those leaders who are actually it factors are the ones that we can lean into and feel close to, even when we're not close to them. And they usually use storytelling to get themselves there.
Mm-hmm. Love that. So in your experience, so you spoke about the storytelling. You spoke about how first we have to understand who we are in order to share that with other people and excel in our journeys. How does embracing our authentic selves, authentic leadership, positively impact an entrepreneur's trajectory?
Well, entrepreneurship is a very special calling. Now, we'll call it a calling because there are those who venture into entrepreneurship who are not called, and you usually know it because they aren't able to sustain. And that's because entrepreneurship is tough. It's hard. And you have to be able to tap into something really, really deep, deep down within that allows you to be resilient and go through those tough times and have the grit that you need to succeed. It takes time and it takes a lot of effort. So in order to do that, in order to reach deep, deep down inside, you have to know who you are. It gets back to knowledge of self. And if you know who you are, you know your limits, you know how you can be stretched, you know what to tap into when it gets hard, you understand your values. Those values are typically what you lean into in order to get motivated. Now, this is where the positive psychology comes in. It's values based. And when you understand what your values are, you know what your boundaries are. So I'll give you a great example. My 3 big values are faith, family, and freedom. And so when I'm faced with a decision, whether it's a big decision or a small decision, if it comes into conflict with any of those 3 things, it's an automatic no. If it enhances those things, well, let's talk some more. It's probably a green light. But part of understanding your values is a part of knowing who you are. And if you don't know what your values are, chances are you will waft in the wind. And I see a lot of entrepreneurs watching Instagram, watching LinkedIn, watching someone else's life.
Yes.
Seeing it unfold the way they think it's unfolding, because, by the way, that's a highlights reel. And they try to mimic what they see. And that's not authentic. And that won't get you very far. You may be inspired by the person, but if you try to walk in that person's shoes, it will not work. Simply because you don't know the values that are driving them, and you don't know their story and what's fueling the energy behind their forward motion. So you end up getting into this mimicky, trying to be somebody else type of thing, and it's just not sustainable.
So good. Now someone is listening and they're like, Michelle, you're saying all the things I know I need to hear. Now I just need to know, how can I start to find that voice? So if someone is listening and they're saying, what are the steps that I could take to start to hone in on my unique leadership identity and find my voice? What would you say?
Okay. So we talked about values with an S, small v. Now we're going to talk about value, your big V, your value. And a lot of us, and this goes back to knowledge of self, we don't know our own value. And it's important to know what that is. And there are 2 types. There's intrinsic value, which comes from deep down within, and it starts with the fact that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Just by the mere fact that you are on earth right now means you have value. You have value because you're a human being, and for many of us, we are children of God. So that's where our intrinsic value comes from. And from that springs our value, small v with an S. And once you know that, and you understand that second small v with an S, your second big V, and that's your extrinsic value. That's what you bring to the market. That's your market value. That's what skills and talents you bring to bear, what problem you solve, and what people are willing to pay you for that. That's one way you can monetize, or you can actually quantify that extrinsic value. You know your value based on what positions you may be qualified for.
Mm-hmm.
Once you understand your extrinsic value and your intrinsic value, there's no stopping you. And that voice is built through confidence. And you only get that confidence when you know what those two big V's are.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so you have worked with so many C-suite leaders, leaders who are business owners as well. Let's talk about how this allows us to deeply connect with our teams and also our audiences. So how does embracing authenticity enable CEOs and entrepreneurs to connect more deeply with their teams and audiences?
Absolutely. There is a concept called likability.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of touchy because now we're in this season in business where the idea of respect is kind
Mm-hmm.
of a thing of the past. Our parents used to say, it was more important to be respected than liked. And to some degree, they were right. But that was the environment they worked in,
Right.
where you worked hard, you put your head down, you worked for 20, 30, 40 years. Nobody was really trying to just make it up the ladder. They were just trying to survive, right?
Right.
But they said that if you put your head down and you were respected, that somebody would tap you on the shoulder and eventually you would get that promotion or whatever was due to you, or that your team would respect you.
Mm-hmm.
These days it's a little bit more complicated. And it has a lot to do with this very fast-paced digital environment that we're in, where people don't really stick around in jobs as long as they used to. And they have more choices. And we as people of color, we have more choices than even our parents did. They were fighting for more access. We have a little bit more access, but we have a lot more choices. So we can move in and out of spaces. And, these organizations understand that you can be replaced. And we understand that we can be replaced, but we also know that we can go somewhere else and do things. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very important that people don't think that you're just on your way in or on your way out. And the way to connect with these teams is through likability, but likability isn't simply being liked. And that's important. It's an important nuance for those of us who are double outsiders, women of color, Black women, even for Black men who may not be double outsiders, but they are outsiders by at least one definition. And that's because that corporation, even the business world, was not built with us in mind. It is built to center white males. So by definition, we're automatically outsiders. So to take on the idea of likability, and I talk about this in my latest book, Yes, Please, 7 Ways to Say I'm Entitled to the C-Suite. It's
Mm-hmm.
important that we understand the nuance between being liked and being likable. Likable is the ability to be liked. So it's a small difference. Small difference.
Mm-hmm.
Like is, well, gee, we may go get drinks every evening if we like each other, right? we may go, kick it at the bowling alley on the weekend with the kids if we like each other. But
Right.
that's not the prerequisite. The prerequisite is likability. And a recent Harvard Business Review article defined likability, and it had much to do with performance. It had a lot to do with the ability to admit when you're wrong, when you've made a mistake, and you have a growth mindset. You learn from that and you fail forward and bring the team with you. And it also has to do with that executive presence, which is around character, style, and substance. And if
Mm-hmm.
we can find our way through that matrix, because it's kind of a lattice of requirements that I just named, we can move our likability up on the scale for our team members, and our team members will be inspired to follow. But we have to set a clear vision. And it's very interesting because I say in the book that we have to be, Olympic style gymnastics doing these
Mm-hmm.
kinds of mind, wrapping our minds around what it means to be likable and Black in a business situation. And for those of us that run businesses that may be primarily Black, maybe we have Black workers, Black teammates, but then we find ourselves vying for contracts that in not so Black centered situations. We find the same situations that those folks in corporate America run into, where you're no longer centered anymore. And you have to find a way to work that likability into the situation so that that new client prospect leans in and can relate to you and wants to give you the business.
Hmm. That's so good. I love that. And it's true. We sometimes feel like we can stay in this bubble and this is all that matters is us worrying about our business and our internal team. But like you said, when you're going for those contracts and things like that, also those other things matter. Are you excellent? Are you excelling? Are you likable? So I love that.
Well, and it's so important as an entrepreneur to be excellent because, I mean, this is how we stay
Right.
in business. There's
Yes.
the marketing that happens that's very deliberate and intentional, but then there's that marketing that happens that's very word of mouth.
Yeah.
And it has everything to do with your reputation.
Hmm.
And if you're killing it, people tend to tell other people, and
Yes.
you need that buzz.
Hmm. And Michelle, you just gave me an aha moment. I think I'm likable, but I really just I gotta really make sure I'm likable.
Yeah,
Love
well,
it.
and now that you know that there are aspects to likability and not
Hmm.
just, oh, gee, do you like me?
Yeah.
In a business scenario, there's some real attributes to what makes someone likable, and there's research behind it.
Love that. And so you mentioned your book. Can you tell us more about your book and what inspired you to write?
Sure. Okay. So this is the third one in a series. It's a little bit of a franchise because my daughter
Hmm.
wrote a children's book that's within the franchise. But the latest one is called Yes, Please, 7 Ways to Say I'm Entitled to the C-Suite. Secrets Women of Color Need to Know Now to Get Their Happy
Hmm.
and Win in an Exclusive Corporate Culture. That's the subtitle. It's a little long. But
Hmm.
ultimately, what I'm doing here, and the forward is penned by Dr. Jeff Gardier, America's psychologist. Many of you may have seen him on Basketball Wives. You may have seen him on Today's Show or CNN.
Hmm.
He's a dear friend of mine, and he's a licensed clinical psychologist. He forwarded the pen because, he pinned the forward. Why am I saying it backwards? He pinned the forward for the book because he really appreciated how most everything that I brought to bear in the book was evidence based in
Hmm.
science. And that's not the way many of the books that are out there that speak to our experience as Black women are are authored, and they're all valuable, but they're
Hmm.
mostly spoken from experience. Now, while my story threads the needle throughout these books, there are examples of how we can leverage these concepts and tactics and strategies in positive psychology and neuroscience to get us over some of these challenges that we
Hmm.
have to go through. And they only get harder as you go up the ladder. So there are 7 affirmations that are the chassis to the book. And just like the forerunner to this book, which was called No Thanks, 7 Ways to Say I'll just include myself.
Love that.
That book has 7 affirmations as well. We build in these affirmations because one of the things that we have to battle as people of color is this negative self-talk that
Yeah.
is consistent. And it doesn't just come from us. We actually take it on from rooms and spaces that already reject us just from walking in the space. So there was a Wall Street Journal article in late 2021 that finally expressed what I knew to be true in my soul. And that was that women, but especially women of color, need to stop saying that they have imposter syndrome as
Mm.
the catch-all term. The term has been around since the 70s. It is not new. But
Right.
really it means this negative self-talk that starts from inside. But women and women of color, sometimes we don't make the distinction between those outside forces that come at us with
Hmm.
negativity, and then we take them on ourselves. So there's a concept in the first book called lean out to lean in. And that simply means that since we aren't centered in this business environment, that we have to lean outside of it to find our value
Hmm.
because it's based in our values, small v, little s, right? At the end.
Right.
We will find that we are able to dip into our circles outside of this organization to find those people and those institutions that have built us up. And because we've been built up and they've told us this is the old black tax, you have to be 10 times as good to even just get
Hmm.
into the room. We know going in there we're better.
Right.
We already know it. So when we go in there, what happens is that negative self-talk coming from us, that's not imposter syndrome. That's bias. That's microaggressions. It's all of those things that happen around us that leave us with this feeling of doubt that make us say, am I really ready for this?
Yeah.
Mom and daddy, and even if we came up in the church or wherever we got our value and values from, they didn't teach us that we couldn't do it. They told us we had to be better.
Mm-hmm.
So where does imposter syndrome really come from for a lot of people? And that's not to say that there aren't those who just automatically feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this. But it just is a caution for us not to just take on that term, because there are many, many forces at work here. So anyway, yes, please, it's a follow-up to no thanks. No thanks focused in on the value, your value as the hero. And we talked about many of these themes that you're asking me about now. You know, how do you find your voice? How do you advocate for yourself? How do you tap into authenticity? The villain in the book is fear. And if we know our value, we can overcome that fear. And that's the one thing that is going to impede our voice, fear. I'll tell you a little secret about fear.
Tell me.
Fear is not a bad thing. Fear was actually built into us for a very good reason. So I got to ask you, if you were in the bush way back in BC, okay?
Okay.
And your husband's out there hunting and gathering. Maybe you did that too, and you're there with your young, naked and afraid in the bush.
And
something rustles in the bush. What do you do?
Panic, like, what's that?
Okay.
I'm not going to see what it is.
What action do you take?
Run.
You run. You either run or you prepare to fight. Right? Fight or flight. That is fear. That is the fear that the good Lord put in all of us. It's a good thing because it's there to protect us. The problem becomes when you've been attacked by that lion or whatever it was, or in some cases, I like to use the analogy of crossing the street. You look both ways, but that Mack truck still blindsided you and knocked you out and you're paralyzed. What are you going to do when it's time to cross the street again? You'll look both ways, but you may not cross the street. That's trauma. Now, let me tell you about trauma and adversity. It's good and bad too. It's unfortunate that sometimes our trauma will dictate how we move forward, if we move forward, how we speak up, how we don't speak up. Our voice can be impacted that way. However, I call this the burden of resilience. This is how we earn resilience, through adversity. It's the only way to get it. It's the only way to get it. So the dilemma becomes, we get this resilience, okay? We're known to be some of the most resilient people out there as Black women, as the double outsider, because we've been through it more than anybody, but we still made a way, okay? Resilient. We are bending but not broken, right? But do we deal with the trauma? How many of us really deal with the trauma that comes from building a business, going in for that competitive bid, knowing that you didn't get in because you weren't willing to partner with a big white firm that maybe eked into your positioning and maybe even your values, and you sat back because that's just not you? Do we go deal with that trauma? So often. It's so interesting. We've gotten to a place, you know, as Black people, we're not as afraid of therapy as we used to be.
I've noticed, yes.
There's a trend. We're calling up the therapist and the counselor and all this stuff. We're getting our head right.
Yes.
We're getting the checkup from the neck up. But we do it for personal relationships. We're not applying those same things to Chad, who was working at every turn to undo us. We got out of that position. We started our own business, and guess what? The escape became the healing. But that's not healing. So what do? We just keep that stuff inside. And so there are other opportunities that are out there that we are doubly afraid of. And we may not even be able to articulate it. That's part of the reason why Dr. Jeff and I have put arms and legs to this book that is all heart and brains.
Yes.
We have introduced a collaboration called Coaching Plus Counseling.
I
And
love
what we've
that.
learned is, thank you. What we've learned is that psychology, therapy, licensed therapy,
Hmm.
all of it can help you heal what's behind you. And certified coaching that's evidence based can accelerate you forward. So imagine if you have both. And I have clients that do.
Hmm.
They have, the ones that are in therapy or in counseling at the same time that they're getting executive and personal coaching, they are on fire and they move further faster because they're actually dealing with the hurt that so many of us have.
Hmm.
The work hurts.
Ooh, so good. I mean, we're going to have to put a link to your invoice page where we can book, because this is like
Sure.
therapy in a podcast. This is so good.
Yes. And it's interesting. I have several partners that I collaborate with. I use the word partner loosely. They're
Hmm.
collaborative, colleagues that have background in career coaching and
Yeah.
business coaching. And, adding Dr. Jeff as a licensed therapist is just amazing. And he's out of New York. A lot of the
Hmm.
coaches that I deal with aren't in the same city as me. But thanks to the wonders of the internet, we can
Hmm.
serve you wherever you are. And Dr. Jeff and I are offering not just referrals for
Hmm.
individuals, but we're also offering seminars for businesses and
Ooh.
workshops where we'll
Hmm.
show up together. For some folks, they just may want us to do a fireside chat,
Yeah.
for their employee base. We're open to that too. And then there's the coaching and also the counseling as well.
Yes, we're definitely going to have to share that in the show notes and spread that to our audience, because this is amazing. So I can only
Awesome.
imagine. And Michelle, so you spoke about also us, the values. And so people are listening, they're like, okay, this is me. I have my personal values, and you talk about not compromising, or people feel like they would have to compromise that. How can entrepreneurs infuse their values into their CEO persona without compromising their business goals?
Well, and I think when you have recognized what your values are, that
Mm-hmm.
it's a little bit easier to make that decision. When they're nebulous and you haven't really thought through what they are,
Mm-hmm.
chances are the chance to compromise is greater. The risk
Mm,
of compromise is greater because you don't know where the lines are drawn.
right.
So it's pretty easy for me if someone calls and says that they want me to do X, Y, and Z, even if it's a big celebrity,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to give me a big platform. If it comes into conflict with any of those three things, my freedom, my faith, or my family, automatic no. And you don't feel bad about it because
Right.
these are the things that they're in you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what matters. Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. And you may be saying, okay, faith, family, freedom. Well, how do you make money? Well, if you align with those values, you're going to make the money, and you're also going to be motivated to make it happen. Because I give the great example of my home.
Mm-hmm.
I built my house about 6 years ago, and I pay the note every month. It's not a big deal. I don't sit up there and wonder, oh, gee, am I going to make the deadline and get it in, or are they going to come for a close? None of this ever occurs to me, and I tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I had the 9 to 5 where I was getting paid every 2 weeks, or now that I'm an entrepreneur and I'm going into year 5, things are a lot more stable.
Mm-hmm.
But in the beginning, sometimes as an entrepreneur, you're like, okay, we got to make some money.
Mm-hmm.
But never miss that mortgage. Why do you not miss the mortgage? It's not because I'm afraid of foreclosure. It's not because I'm afraid of late fees. It's not that. It's my 11-year-old daughter. That's why I pay my house note. You see how that
Mm-hmm.
goes?
Yes.
I
Family.
want things. I want a roof over my daughter's head. I want her to be safe. I want
Right.
her to have a great environment to learn when she's not at school, to have a great place to play when her friends come over. These are the things that drive me, and nothing will stop me. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's always going to be enough money for the mortgage. Always.
Always.
Hmm.
Love that. And so how can people strike a balance between, staying true to themselves and then adapting to the demands of their roles or having to adapt?
We're back to values, right? And once you establish what those are, you're able to make boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of entrepreneurs, and corporate folks too, have a real problem with managing their time. And
Mm-hmm.
so often as entrepreneurs, we go from leaving that 9 to 5 job, and sometimes you're working 40, 60, 80 hours a week.
Yes.
And you're driving yourself down physically,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, spiritually, all of that stuff, and you're no good for anybody else. They say there's wisdom in what the flight attendant says, put your mask on first
Mm-hmm.
before you can help anybody else. So drawing those lines around your calendar and knowing when you'll work and when you're not going to work is so important to making sure that you have set boundaries for the things that you actually value, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And those values, too, are going to drive how you prioritize what's on the calendar. Whoever owns your time owns your life,
Mm-hmm.
period. So who's driving it? That's the question. Who's in charge? Is it your admin? Is she the one that's making sure that, and she's the one that says yes and no? That's great. But is she in charge? Are you
Mm-hmm.
in charge? And are you really mapping out your time the way that you should so that you are well and you are taking care of yourself and that you are not overworking so that you can peel your hours back? Maybe you need to set some goals. And this is the other thing. If we're so busy and we're not setting priorities, we're not setting boundaries, it's like we're wafting in the wind. Anything goes.
Right.
Anything goes. And you wind up in situations where you're not healthy. You're, not knowing up from down. You may have all the money in the bank, but you're not taking care of yourself and you're not taking care of the people around you. So how do you go about making sure that you have set the right boundaries? You have to know what your limits are, and those limits are tied to your values. I don't know how to get around it.
The values. We learn it. Yes, it's true. And also in all of this, we've spoken about Black people, how we operate, and I want to talk about our culture and our leadership styles. So what advice would you have for the Black entrepreneurs who are seeking to integrate their culture into their CEO voice?
Do it. I mean, if that's authentically you, why not?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think what people need to understand about what makes that authenticity important to leadership is once you get to a certain level,
mm-hmm.
and everybody's smart, your peers, everybody around you, you made it into those rooms. Everybody's smart. Everybody's excellent. Everybody's killing it.
Mm-hmm.
What makes you different? What is the secret sauce? It really is who you are, because nobody else can be that but you.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one you. Everybody else is taken, they say, right? Your culture is another part of your identity that is very much a part of you. It's hard for me to see how people actually separate that from themselves, but there are people who try, and
yes,
it's not. And you've been around these people. They're not the best people to be around.
Yeah.
So yes, I encourage it by all means, but I also want to challenge you to understand what aspects of your culture, what aspects of what make you who you are, really improve the business, grow the business, enhance the business, enhance you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of these areas that we have overlooked is the idea of resilience. And I know that's kind of a popular term right now, but as people of color, as Black people, looking at generation over generation over generation of our people in the struggle,
mm-hmm.
and we are still here. And we are still winning.
Yes.
There's something to be said about that. And that's something that we need to bring into our leadership. Resilience, that's one. Innovation, that's two. Innovation is, you know what the definition of innovation is?
What's it?
Making something out of nothing.
Yes.
Did you watch your grandmother do that? Did you watch your mother do that? Did you watch your dad do that? Make $1 out of 15 cents. That takes, and here's the third part, creativity. I had a conversation with a Baltimore book club just recently about Yes Please. And we were talking about how our people in just about every discipline have sashayed through, taken that discipline and parlayed it into something different. Okay. And I took them way back to Who's Your Basketball. You know, they talk about Who's Your Basketball, and that usually was pass 8 times before you shoot.
Mm.
You know how that went, right? Pass, shoot. Very boring. What happened when we came into the basketball realm? Well, we added some sauce, right?
Mm-hmm.
We added some sauce. Akeem Olajuwon is known for what they call today the alley-oop. And you just saw this massive man throw this ball into the air. It wasn't even to go into the hoop. It was just somewhere near the baseboard. And some giant man came flying out of nowhere, another one, and dunked it in midair. We're doing that in every discipline, not just sports and entertainment. We're doing it in every discipline. Oprah is a great example of that. Tiger's a great example of that. We have known to bring our special sauce and our creativity to just about everything we do. And it's our unique way of shining. I will say that a lot of people don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And you will be punished for it in some ways. I mean, look at Simone Biles. We already mentioned, you know, being a multi, you know, Olympian, just trying to wrap our minds around likability. But Simone Biles embodies what I believe, especially Black women go through, where you get penalized because you were doing things that nobody else can do, not because you were wrong in doing it. Just that you just took it to a whole new level and nobody can compete. And we do as entrepreneurs, we do it as corporate executives. We just have to be ready for that. But I would say that creativity, innovation, resilience, those are 3 of our biggest traits and superpowers when it comes to being Black, period.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to get into communication. Effective communication is very pivotal for CEOs. So what elements contribute to impactful communication in a leadership role?
Empathy. It doesn't even break down to the words and how you say it. I mean, that's important, okay? But when you really get down to brass tacks, it really is about the other person.
Yeah.
Or the other, whoever's on the receiving end of what you have to say. What do they need? What do they need to hear now? What do they need to know? How will you communicate that in a way that acknowledges who they are and sees them?
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of listening. And that's before we even open our mouths or put pen to paper or however we plan to communicate. We have to know who we're talking to, what their needs are. You know, when I'm coaching executives around speaking on the platform, you know, so many people are like, oh, I'm just so nervous and I don't know. I want to make sure I say the right thing. And, you know, where are my talking points? Have you noticed just in the past few sentences that I just made, the words I, me, and my came up more than anything else that I said?
Mm-hmm.
When a speaker, a communicator of any kind figures out that it's not about them and it's about the people that you're about to serve,
right?
You have removed self from the equation. And suddenly you can connect with people in a much better fashion. And a part of that is empathy. Because you ask yourself, what is it that they need?
Right.
What if I walked in their shoes? What is it that they would be looking to me for? Then you can not only communicate, you can lead.
And Michelle, there are people who are listening that are likely first-time entrepreneurs, new entrepreneurs, first generation, and they're in a season where they're maybe hiring someone and they're dealing with, okay, we spoke about it before, that imposter syndrome or that self-doubt when it comes to, okay, now I have to lead this team. Like, how can they overcome those communication challenges that they're having, such as that imposter syndrome or self-doubt?
Again, get yourself out of the way. It's not about you at this point. It really is about your people. I remember when I was running my agency, I really did feel that my people were an extension of me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I recognized that there were lives that happened when people left the doors of my agency, and that at the very basic minimum, that the dollars that we generated help them to live their lives. Mm-hmm. There's a degree of responsibility that happens that takes you out of the way, just takes you out of the equation. It's not that you're going to overlook yourself, but suddenly you have their interest in mind, and you're not worried about imposter syndrome. It's how can I support these folks? I recognize that there were brand new college graduates who were getting their first apartments. Mm-hmm. There were career veterans who bought their first luxury cars. There were families, new families that had brand new babies. There were, I could go down the list. Mm-hmm. These were my people. And so I cared for them like they were my. I'll tell you the impact this had on me when I started thinking of it that way. Uh-huh. You know the Myers-Briggs?
Yes.
The assessment for your personality?
Yes.
I was an ENTJ. I had a J on the end before I started my business. Mm-hmm. In the midst of that, my J turned into a P. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting?
Interesting. I was going to say interesting.
Yeah. So for those of you out there, the J stands for judging, and it's not in the way that I'm judging you. It's not like that.
Yeah.
It's more critical mind, right? And you pick things apart, and you're a little bit more analytical, and it's on a spectrum. So that J and that P are on one spectrum. And so you might be in the middle of that. And in fact, my E, which is extroversion, just one tick to the left and I'm an I. I'm an introvert. So I'm more of an ambivert, if you will.
Yeah.
I can turn it on and off, and then I'll go somewhere and hide. Y'all better not going to find me, right? Yeah. So on the J and the P, though, I did not realize how close I was to teetering towards a P. But caring, and that's the word I'm going to use, caring for my employees and my staff took me right on over to P. And I haven't been back to J since.
Love that.
Yeah, it really is about, at some point, you become that servant leader. You hear people talk about it all the time, but those people become a part of you. And you begin to empathize with them, and the decisions that you're making, you're not focused on you to the extent that you're like, what do I say? What do I do? What do I do? You're going to know what to do.
Right.
Because it's going to tap into that instinct and that intuition. But that's emotional intelligence. And a lot of people don't have that dialed up. Some people aren't capable. And I'll give you a little tidbit from the book. There's an industrial psychologist named Carrie Sullivan that I interviewed for the book. And her company is amazing. They're using AI right now to aggregate many of the conversations that are going on outside of companies. And they're able to take that data and predict the success of that company based on understanding how many fixed mindsets they have in charge and how many growth mindsets they have in charge. Now, growth mindsets are typically people who are highly emotionally intelligent, and they're also innovative people. They think outside the box. You want these people in charge, okay? And it's not to say that a fixed mindset is not valuable, but they have their place within an organization. Right. She revealed a formula to me that was just, it was mind-blowing. And it helped me a lot, too, with this idea of adversity ushering in resilience. Because a lot of people who have been through adversity, they're more resilient. They have these growth mindsets, okay? It's all connected, right? But so you get to this point where you can pick out the fixed mindsets. The rule goes like this. fixed mindsets can report to growth mindsets. Works out great. Fixed mindsets can report to fixed mindsets. I mean, it's going to be kind of a very process-oriented place, but it works, okay? But a growth mindset cannot report to a fixed mindset. You know why? Those fixed mindsets are so process-oriented that when your growth mindset shows up and is thinking outside the box, and they're trying to innovate, they're trying to create, they're okay with failing forward, that fixed mindset is going to try and get that, they're going to try and get that under control. They'll tamp it down. In the worst case scenario, they will push you out. So, we're talking about these assessments and such, but if you can get a good feel as to the mix that you have and the reporting structures that you have within your businesses based on fixed and growth mindsets, you can plot the course for your business and know that you're going to excel, or you're going to fold in not too much time because you get too many fixed mindsets in charge of these growth innovators.
It's not going to work. Right. Get the book. We got to get the book. Yes.
Yeah, let's get the book.
That's so good. Okay. All right. And so what role does active listening play in all of this?
Well, active listening, let's define what it is. It means that you are, well, and there's mindful listening too. It's related. But active listening means that you are actively in tune with what someone is saying to you, or what they're communicating to you, because it's not always words. And it means that you are focused on what they have to say and what they're trying to communicate to you. If you are not actively listening, if you're not mindfully listening, and mindfully listening takes it a little bit further, where you're listening without judgment,
right?
But you're completely focused on the other individual or the group or whoever it is. If you cannot actively listen, you will miss cues that are important as a leader to move forward. You will have blind spots. You've got to do it. So how do you practice active listening? I'll give you an exercise that I've used with not just my leaders, but I'm an adjunct professor, Texas Christian University. My students use it too. And I arm them before they go into their careers with active listening tools. Okay. One thing that you can do is when someone's speaking to you, before you answer them or give them a response, you reflect back to them what you've heard. So it goes something like this. You approach me and you're like, Michelle, Coach L, I'd really like for my team to hear me better, but I'm not sure what I should do. I'm having weekly meetings and they're reporting out, but something's missing. So instead of me giving advice right away, I'll say, I believe I hear you saying that you need your team to hear you. And you're having meetings every week and they're reading out to you, but something's missing. Now, I almost regurgitated that verbatim. You might summarize it in a different way, but this is an opportunity for that other person to say, you know what, you heard me. Or, you know what, not quite. What I really meant to say was, or here's what I wanted to communicate, and it probably didn't come through. Do you see how reflecting like you're a mirror allows for the other person to be heard? And you're able to be positioned as someone who cares enough not to just chime in and answer,
right?
But to hear them.
Yeah. Sometimes when I hear people, I love that exercise. Sometimes when I hear people say that, I also, as someone who's communicating probably with the person, or if I were talking to you and you repeated what I said, maybe it has to be in this setting, but I'm like, are they being sarcastic? Are they about to say what I'm saying is wrong? Or there's a problem with what I'm saying?
Yeah. And you know what? That probably goes back to an experience you've had before.
Yes. Trauma.
Yes. There it is.
That's good. Realization. Okay. Love that exercise. I'm gonna dive into that. What's going on there? But this has been so amazing. And I know people are listening. They're like, okay, how can I work with El Michelle, Coach El? So let's talk about some of the work that you're doing at No Silos Communication and supporting entrepreneurs with refining their leadership skills. Can you talk about your offers and your services?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, I'm an executive and personal coach, and I'll take on individuals if that's what they'd like. So often we do experiences. I call them experiences instead of packages, all the way up to year renewable. You could do 6 months, anything in between. And that's when we have a clearly stated goal that we're going after. And it takes some time to unpack what we're trying to unpack and reach that goal. I also have folks that are kind of a la carte clients that might call the office or even click the link and just book, one-off conversations. I don't have as many of those. I work with organizations, whether directly with an individual leader or with a group of leaders, to help them towards whatever goal is mapped out for them. But I also have some individuals that come to me from the Fortune 500, mostly Fortune 100, and also entrepreneurs who perhaps they're company sponsors, maybe they have coaches inside, but they don't really want to use the internal coaches. They want to use someone like me. So even though it's a confidential relationship, they feel more autonomy and more flexibility and freedom in what they might want to say and do. And in some cases, maybe they want to discuss leaving or doing something else. And they feel that comfort in being in that safe space. I'm also a consultant. So there are companies that come to me and they say, okay, here's our problem. What do you think we should do about it? And it's always in the realm of leadership. And it typically has something to do with marginalized groups, but not always. Sometimes it might be a specialty type segment, or it may be their entire leadership. Doesn't matter. And we try to hack those things. I'm a professional speaker, so I get called to organizations and conferences, and I get on the platform and I deliver keynote addresses. So that happens too. And then of course I'm a writer. So my books, I mentioned two of them. No Thanks actually has two editions. The second edition is called No Thanks, the Remix, and it has 2/3 more content than the first book. And what's important about that book that leads to Yes Please is that I introduce the research that is fleshed out in Yes Please at the end of the remix. And it talks about how I did a survey of 100 professional Black women leaders and asked two questions, one by race and by gender. Who had been the most helpful in your leadership quest and who had been the most harmful? That's the second question. And in the first, in the remix, we revealed that there was this problematic white woman that 60% of these women all agreed had given them issues on their climb. But I didn't reveal who's on the rest of the list and who's on that other list until you get to Yes Please. And you'll also find that the core of that research is around happiness. And how many of these same women said that they were not happy in corporate America. And it was about 90%. And knowing what we know to be true in positive psychology, happy people are successful people.
Yes.
So how are we ever supposed to get to the C-suite if we're not happy, let alone we're facing these microaggressions and all these other things?
Yeah.
So my job and my mission has been to get these ladies back to happy. And to give you a little bit more insight of what we mean by happy, I reference the church a lot. And you'll know my next book has a lot to do with the Black church. But we say, this joy that I have, you didn't give it, the world can't take it away.
Yes.
That's what science calls happiness. It's that deep-seated, rooted in values. Whether your value is faith or whatever it is, it's rooted, it's deep-rooted, and nobody can take that away. It allows you to walk on that floor even though, they're throwing daggers at you, and hold your head up high and, still giggle from time to time. That's the kind of happiness that we're looking for. And I speak to, 4 or 5 other women who've made it to the C-suite, and they talk about these positive emotions. They don't call them that. And this is the thing. Culturally, we typically don't speak of these things in these terms because we haven't had access to this information.
Right.
But you'll hear like the CEO, the chief experience officer of the Utah Jazz say, when things got tough, I looked outside of myself and I encouraged other women. And what you find is that brought her joy because she saw how the encouragement made the other women smile. And it also provided her with a sense of pride. So suddenly it's, girl power. And neuroscience says you need 3 positive emotions to offset a negative emotion. If we only knew this stuff.
Right.
Jim knows it. This is why Jim is, he picks up his golf club and he's putting around during the day and he's playing with his Rubik's Cube or he's jumping outside in the hallway and playing foosball with Chad or whoever else. And we're there going, oh, well, he's white. He's got that privilege. Or, he's Jim. He's got time on his hand. No. An executive coach like me asked him a question. And it probably went something like this. What could you do during your day to stop and have a little fun? Because amusement is one of the 10 positive emotions. And so Jim is like, oh, well, I got my clubs. I could bring those. I'm an avid golfer. So I'll bring my clubs. So we're sitting up there thinking he's just putting around.
Right.
Strategy. Because when Jim puts that putter down and he goes back to work, he's not only rejuvenated neurons in his brain, he's gotten a dopamine hit and he's sharper because that's what fun does to our brain.
Wow.
Yeah.
We gotta have, so this has to happen again. Talk about the science behind all of this because this is good.
Well, and let me tell you, shameless plug, Dr. Jeff and I are doing an event, a live event. It's free on Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Central, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Okay. And you can sign up for it at nsccoaching.info/happy-anyway. And then make sure that the H is capitalized and the A is capitalized. Okay. And you can sign up for the Zoom. It's a private event. We're not streaming this time.
Writing that, we're going to put it in the show notes for sure. And then I'm going to sign up myself.
Awesome.
Yes.
Look forward to seeing you actually.
Yes. When I tell you, this conversation has been so fruitful and I'm like, okay, this is definitely one of those conversations I know I'm going to have to go back and listen to multiple times. Like there are a few episodes I'm like, I need to go back in because I'm learning during our conversation, but it has been so enlightening for me for sure.
Excellent. That's good to hear. And I hope your listeners feel the same.
They definitely will. We're like, I attract similar minds.
Good.
Okay. So, Michelle, can you talk about a transformation story, like from one of your clients where you was just like, I did that, or it just made you so happy?
One of my favorite stories to tell, and she's not an entrepreneur, but it is a case study in knowing your value. You can apply it to entrepreneurship where you're going out and trying to get these deals or get your product placed in a big, outlet or whatever you're trying to do. But this young lady was sitting 2 beneath the chief learning officer, one of the officers, pretty high up in a Fortune 10. And if you know the way these big companies are built, so many of the middle management folks, senior managers, directors, they're really the subject matter experts. They're the SMEs. They know the business inside and out. And they're usually running the teams that execute everything that happens. And it just kind of trickles up and that officer looks good because of what the team is doing. But because she ran into the same problematic white woman that is described in that research that I mentioned, the 60% of the Black women said that this problematic white woman. Right. And I'm very particular about saying problematic white woman because white women show up on that helpful list too at 22%. So they're there. They okay. So anyway, she's got one of the problematic ones who has some clout, who consistently got threatened because this young lady was called to speak because people understood that she was a technologist. She's an engineer. She was building this technology, but she also had this cultural overlay, which nobody in the industry could touch. I mean, it was just with genius.
Yeah.
And she was doing amazing things for this big brand. And people knew it was her. It was she, right? So at every turn, this woman was really just putting her thumb down on her. And when she realized she was shining, she'd try and, keep her from the speaking ops.
Oh, no.
Or, she even took the title away from her, gave her a different kind of title,
What?
kind of demoted her. Yeah, it was just bad, just bad. And she was very concerned because she had something to say, but she was very concerned about saying it and using her channels, especially social media and even speaking outside of some of these company speaking ops. She was concerned about doing that because she thought that this woman and her minions were going to give her even more grief. And that's a real concern. It's a concern for a lot of people.
Yes.
And so at some point, she recognized that what they were trying to stamp out was actually her superpower. She had to come to a conclusion, even though we had worked through ways where she could share her message in a gated fashion to where if she shared it, her workmates wouldn't see it. But she was getting to her audience. One day she just decided, she said, you know what? They're not going to like me anyway. So what if I posted on LinkedIn, and what if I started getting more speaking opportunities about this topic? She did that. In less than 3 months, she had offers from inside that company, this Fortune 10, at another part of the business, had offers from there, had offers from Facebook, Netflix. There's one other big tech company. And in short order, was not only able to 4x her salary.
Oh, wow.
She was able to move to a totally different coast where the company wasn't even located. Because her dream was she wanted to get her kids back down south, near family, with a big yard, a big wraparound porch.
Oh, it's not like my life.
And that's what she's doing.
I love that.
She had to get intentional, and she had to realize everybody's not going to like you. But that thing that makes you shine, that thing that makes you authentically you, you have to lean into it.
Certainly. That's a breakthrough for a lot of people. Yes.
Yeah.
Because I know so many people, even being on the Black to Business podcast, and especially what I do, I've seen it happen where people try to hide themselves, or even when we talk about earlier, people just trying to hide their Blackness. And even you saying, and people who've come on the podcast before saying how that is our superpower. And there are so many for her to, what her thing is, but not hiding ourselves and being authentic like we spoke about. So I love that. And that's a breakthrough for a lot of people.
Awesome.
Yes. All right. So Michelle, how do you stay organized as a CEO? Any tools and resources that really help you?
Okay. Now this is the topic. I'm going to have to direct you to an article I wrote for Zapier. For a long time, I was an ambassador for Zapier, writing content for them. I was also a coach for a lot of their executives for a long while. But there's an article that I wrote where I described 50 plus apps that help me run my business and the automations behind it. I'm huge into technology. And in this first book that I wrote, No Thanks, one of the affirmations surrounded the idea of wielding weapons of mass innovation. It's a leadership imperative.
Yes. Digital
transformational leadership. In fact, I have a growth group. I call it a growth group of people who meet me in my online private network. It's called SlayNet. It's named after the journal that goes with No Thanks. It's called Slay Every Day, 52 Weeks to Rockstar Leadership. But it's called SlayNet, and inside of SlayNet, there's a growth group called The Circle. And all this month, we're exploring the different forms of leadership that are imperative right now in this current environment. Digital transformational leadership is one of those. If you are not learning or practicing AI and what AI can do for your organization, for your business, you're asleep at the wheel. You're asleep
Yep.
at the wheel. And more than just, hey, write me this. Hey, recite Mary Had a Little Lamb. You really need to tap into this knowledge bank.
Yes.
And allow it to be consultative. Ask it questions that will help you to better your business. I have been able to take tasks off of the hands of my assistant and my social media manager because of AI. It's like I have a whole new person that does these things. And so, yeah, technology is my big answer to your question. It keeps me completely organized, but it also is the fuel to the business. It helps me to innovate. It also helps me to scale.
Love it. And what advice would you give to a new entrepreneur?
The first thing that comes to mind, give yourself some grace and give yourself some time. We live in a society that thinks instant gratification is real and that it takes failure to get where you're ultimately trying to go. That means that everything's not going to work out right away. Things take time. Who was it that said that overnight successes took years? Like they looked overnight to you because suddenly you saw them.
Right.
But you don't know those people's stories. And since we're in this internet world where you can look at somebody's highlight reel on LinkedIn or Instagram and go, oh, how'd she do that? I want to do that too. Sis, turn that off. Get off of social. Don't even spend time doing that. The race is against you. The race is against yourself and your potential. It's not against anyone else. And you're definitely not out there trying to mimic anyone. We know that's not, what do they say? Comparison is the killer of confidence.
Yep.
Yeah, so do you allow yourself to fail, learn from that failure, give yourself the grace to fail. It's the only way you're going to learn. And give yourself the grace to have the time to put in to what you're doing to ultimately see success in the long run. Because that's what it takes. And it takes expertise. So always be upskilling. Always.
Love that. And finally, what does it mean to you to be Black in business?
Ooh, what does it mean for me to be Black in business? That's deep. Where to begin? I think I'm going to lean into what we've already said. That burden of resilience that we have as Black people. It's a catch-22. One, it comes with the trauma, but boy, does it come with it comes with the sauce, right? So the fact that I have, more than 25 years behind me working for extraordinary brands, but also running my business before, and the ability that gives me to alley-oop, to moonwalk, to make things look so easy. I attribute that to being Black because I have had to climb some hills and I've had to learn things the hard way, or face Chad and face Karen, whoever it is. It's like you've seen the devil, you fought and you won, so bring it.
Bring it.
That's what I love about being Black in business.
Beautifully said. Elle Michelle, people who are listening are going to want to know how can they find you, connect with you, and support you. So please do share.
Sure. My website is lmichellesmith.com. You can find me on Instagram at lmichellesmith, on TikTok at the lmichellesmith, on Twitter. What is it called? Is it Twitter anymore? It's
Twitter, X, one of them.
It's Elle Michelle Speaks, and on LinkedIn at Elle Michelle Smith.
Perfect. When I say this has been an amazing conversation, it truly has. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to pour into my audience, also for the work that you are doing. Truly appreciate it. And just thank you for being on the Black to Business podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bye.
Didn't I tell you that was going to be a good one? Such a great conversation. It was so enlightening. And I honestly felt like it was a therapy session in a conversation, neuroscience, all the things that we need to know about cultivating our voice and being authentic in the process so that we can have an influence. So powerful, and I hope that you found as much value as I did in it. So learning about all of these things are key when it comes to the entrepreneurship journey. So just to give a few takeaways, we learned about evidence-based coaching, the power of authenticity, and the role of likability in leadership, because it is vital for anyone in their entrepreneurial journey. So if you want to learn more about L. Michelle Smith and delve deeper into the insights that she shared today, head over to blacktobusiness.com/168, and there you'll find additional resources and ways to connect with her. And speaking of personal experiences, I had the privilege of attending her virtual Happy Anyway session alongside Dr. Jeff Gardier. And while it happened before this episode, because we actually recorded this episode last month in September, so shout out to us for staying ahead and recording. And about the event, so I can genuinely say that it was a phenomenal experience. Just like our conversation during this episode, it was very therapeutic and insightful. So make sure that you follow El Michelle for updates on more upcoming workshops and opportunities to tap into her wealth of knowledge. All right, I will chat with you next week. But until then, keep building your authentic CEO voice. And remember, your journey to success is uniquely yours. Thank you so much for being a part of the Black to Business family, and please share this episode with a friend. Talk to you later.